Welcome to Bread and Butter. We're serving up the basics the average Hearthstone player needs for improvement. Tito, how have you been?
I am fantastic, but I don't know why you're talking to me. I think we should talk to our very special guest here today. Edelweiss, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, we appreciate it. It's. I think we're starting to feel like this might be more of a interview show where we bring on guests that know things more than us because that's our thing is we're trying to learn. We're amateurs, but we're getting better and we're improving our Hearthstone game. But who better to help us than the people that know more than we do? Doc, how are you?
Uh, I'm doing good. Just been playing Battlegrounds. I actually hit 5K last night, which is nice because usually it takes me significantly longer into like the MMR reset to hit 5K because I don't get a lot of playing time. And then in my like personal life, I found out that my brother is going to be shooting a documentary in South Korea in a couple months about the dog meat markets. So it's kind of sad, but it's because one of his classmates adopted slash saved a dog from a South Korea meat market, and they just started getting that ball rolling, and so that's probably going to happen here in a couple months. But Edelweiss, what have you been doing Hearthstone wise recently?
So I've mostly been playing Control Shaman and some various kinds of Paladins. I feel like I go through waves of how good Paladin feels or not. A bit matchup dependent. It's pretty solid into the priests that I've been seeing, not the thief ones, but any of like the Naga or Blessed priests. Just having access to equality city tax is really good there, and righteous defense as well. And it's just a lot of fun ending games with the Countess.
I've seen quite a bit of quite a bit more of Paladin lately. Unfortunately, most of the time it's Rogue. And I've been mostly streaming when I'm playing the latter. Had good nights and bad nights. I've climbed with Relic Demon Hunter. I've lost with Relic Demon Hunter. I like I mentioned in our pre-show, I had one game of Thief Priest that I played that I harvested the Harvester and their Kazakhstan on the same turn, and that still didn't complete the game. So that's kind of how nutty Thief Priest is. And if you're planning on playing it, make sure you're not doing it with the expectation of getting a quick game in mind, because those things do not exist with that. All right, Doc, I know we kind of skipped over setting the table, but how about we get into some appetizers?
No, Homer, don't fill up on bread!
Yeah, so the mini set is announced and is coming out in just a couple days. And the flavor's really nice. Maw and Disorder. And I think one of the cards I'm most excited about, not specifically because I think the card is going to be really, really good, but because I wanted the old version of this card to be back, is Sylvanas. She's an iconic Hearthstone card to me. I just felt like she should have been in the base set, just as a card that like you could throw in as a tech card. Like OG Sylvanas stays are definitely gone in standard because that effect's not like super great anymore. But the fact that she's back and just has me excited about her. What about you, Edelweiss?
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to see the return of our queen, Sylvanas. All the best hunter skins are Sylvanas, and it slots very nicely into the shaman that I'm already playing. So pretty excited to have access to Sylv.
How about you? Any other cards you're very excited about? This episode will probably be out after the mini set comes out, so we don't know all the cards yet, so things might change. But as of the cards we've seen so far, which one has you most excited? Just
I
in
think
general?
Order in the Court is the one that I'm most excited about so far. So Paladin card, 2 mana, basically the Pull Celt effect. Order your deck from highest to lowest and then draw a card.
So better than tokens,
in some
actually.
respects, yeah, it's easier to just like fit in on a given turn. It replaces itself. So like you're going to get your most expensive card, whatever it is, as opposed to Polkelt. If they were able to shuffle your deck right away, then you couldn't get that thing. I'm looking at a few ways of using that now, since it is Paladin exclusive, right? It's only so much you can do. But I was thinking about like you just put the Jailer as a 10 drop, like the clear things, since in Paladin right now you really want to run the 9-drop elemental that gets discounted and has taunt. So if you want to make sure you draw a given thing that's at the top of your curve, you want it to be 10 mana. So with Order in the Court, I can much more closely look at stuff like a Denathrius deck, where you can, get him early and start infusing, or maybe not that early, but sort of guarantee that you hit it at least in the mid game. Or the Jailer, which is another card from the mini set, and I think that could be interesting in Paladin if you want to like play some neutral cards, but eventually just turn on the Countess by playing the Jailer. And so since you don't have a deck anymore, it doesn't matter how many neutrals started in it, she'll just be active. That could be.
So, no, that's really interesting, and actually that plays right into our theme tonight, which is
yes,
deck building. I love it. But what do you think? So 2 questions on Paladin though. 1, do you think that these cards are enough to get it there? That's 3 questions. Do you think that? So 1, do you think it's enough to get it there? 2, do you think Law and Order is going to keep Theo in the meta even if it gets nerfed, because that pretty much tells you, hey, I just drew my best card, I'm going to take it. And one last one, I'm sorry, how does Guardian Grace get affected by this effect? Because doesn't that 10 mana card that reduces?
Yeah, so I've been kind of moving away from including Guardian's Grace in my lists. It would definitely kind of slow things down a little bit, unless you're specifically wanting to hit Guardian's Grace. Then of course it's fine sort of having that at 10. It's still considered 10 while it's in your deck, so it would be the next draw. But often, you run stuff like Knight of Anointment, which draws a holy spell, so that could draw them first. I've been leaning more towards keeping a minimum number of spells, though, so that you can pretty consistently hit your equality city tax clear. So kind of the only spells I've been doing have been equality, city tax, and righteous defense. And if we're just doing that, you don't really... There's Battle Vicar, but it's like a little challenging to reduce Guardian's Grace. And certainly if I'm going to be using Order in the Court to sort of specifically hit stuff, then I think I want to continue not running Guardian's Grace in those instances.
Fair. I like it. I think, to your point, Doc, I'm very excited to have Sylvanas back as well. But I do think people are going to overvalue the stealing effect. I think we're going to see a lot of people that are going to hold it when they really should just tempo it out, kill something, and move on. So I'm really interested to see how that goes. I'm kind of excited for the Jailer. I think he's bait. I don't think he's going to be good in very many decks, because you're going to run him out and you'll be like, I have everything is invincible, but then someone's going to run that Whirlpool and you're just going to hit that concede button. But I do think I hadn't thought about the Countess idea, because you can bait, as long as you have what you want in your hands, you can bait out some of that removal, and then it's a end of game aura. So I know I've seen some people are excited to use the Jailer with the Warlock legendary that keeps making minions when your deck is empty.
It's maybe not the fastest clock there. But it does prevent you from just losing to something like a Whirlpool, because you'll have a steady stream of immune minions.
And if you happen to have that along with the quest reward, then your opponent is definitely.
If you have the quest reward, I don't know that you need any of these other things.
Probably not, but isn't it more fun to?
I'll tell you what I'm going to use with the quest reward is Habeas Corpses. So
Oh, what is
it's
that again?
3 mana, resurrect a minion that died this game, and it gains rush and dies at the end of the turn. So I would use this to bring back our old friend Stealer of Souls. And basically, since they nerfed Stealer of Souls to 6 mana, obviously it's really challenging to like combo off with that in the way you used to, and certainly it'd still be slower. But pretty much against anything that doesn't have a transform effect, you can just run Stealer out on 6, as long as you haven't had too many minions die, and then resurrect it on the turn that you want to just like play your deck and play the reward and kill them. So
Very nice. Now would no, I guess that one. Never mind. I was thinking about that card that makes your enemy's hand cost health instead of mana. Would that factor in there at all? Probably not, right?
I don't think so. It's more like about making our stuff cost health instead of mana. Now, of course, it won't be too insane because we don't have Dark
that's
Glare.
fine.
You can't refresh mana crystals the way that we did before, so it won't be quite as like OTK-ish, but there's just not a ton of great ways of pushing through that quest right now that I feel like Stealer of Souls could actually make its way back if you want a way of completing that quest.
So, Edelweiss, what is your history with Hearthstone? When did you get started?
So I got started after release. So like I wasn't in part of the beta or anything, and I might have missed the first few months, but I had been a long-time Magic player, and in college, my friends said, hey, there's this cool game that you can just play on your computer. There was no mobile at the time, so it was still just your computer. And yeah, basically we were all card game addicts and, couldn't always just play with a person in person at any given time. So Hearthstone was a way of just being able to play a card game whenever you want. It was the first in the digital space, really. And I got kind of hooked. It was still always my second game while I was in college, but once I graduated and moved away and no longer had my regular group of friends to play Magic with, it more and more just became my main game. So yeah, I guess around 2016, I really started playing a whole lot more and going to locals, winning some of those locals, and to the point that in 2018 I qualified for HCT Rio and got flown out to compete down there. I did not do particularly well against Hoy and Hayes and oh god, Muzzy was there, Rage was there. It was like all of these big name players, and I was like, I feel uncomfortable.
What are your Magic colors? What are your and what set did you come in?
I probably came in super early, like to the point that it was, kitchen table Magic. I wouldn't really have known what was current because I was playing like Invasion and Onslaught cards. Kamal, Fist of Krosa, kind of stuff. So they were not like real decks for a while. But when I started getting actually competitive with Magic, I think I dabbled a bit, did a lot of drafts in Alara block and like Lorwyn and Ravnica, original Ravnica. And when I did, I think my first PTQ where I top 8'd was Rise of the Eldrazi. So like Zendikar block the first time around. And I generally played mono red because I was in high school and that's all I could afford to do.
Are you currently playing anything besides Hearthstone?
No, not really.
I'm guessing that's a
No,
loaded
I'm
question.
not.
Okay.
I go through waves, right? So when we're at kind of the end of a meta, and there's like that 2 weeks to sometimes a month where it's really easy to, we're just waiting for the new expansion and feeling kind of meh about the game. That's where I usually play something else. Previous instances of this have been like Sekiro, Divinity 2, Control, Horizon Zero Dawn. So there's a lot of games that I've like wanted to play, and since COVID, I've actually started to play games that aren't card games. Cause growing up, I played a lot of RPGs, and I played Warcraft 3, and I played all this other stuff. And then there was just this period where I played card games, and I didn't play anything besides card games. But I always looked at people playing these other cool games. I'm like, oh, that would be cool. But I seem to only play card games. Part of that is for the longest time not really being a console gamer, and just having a gaming laptop. But yeah, I finally have decided to just like make time every once in a while to go through my Steam library.
Yeah, I have games on my Steam library I've never played, or even like I picked up. I remember you see them on sale. I picked up Brothers. I wanted to play.
I've heard of that one.
Played that.
Yep.
I know I want to play I want to play Undertale and all these, but like I'm a WoW player and I'm a Hearthstone player, and between those two, I'm like I have so much sunk costs into those that I don't want to pick up another game. I do play a lot of Civ, but those are my three. Those all take up so much time that to think about playing anything else, I'm like, but I have raids on Tuesdays and Sundays, and
Yeah.
I have to play some Hearthstone, and it's just hard to work anything else in. But Doc, you've been playing Life is Strange.
Yes.
Nice.
And it's my first time through, and I love the game. But my God, it's breaking my heart so bad right now. I'm not going to go into any specific detail because it's one of those games where it loses like the big effect once you know what's happening, and like unfortunately, like that means like the replay value drops very hard. But you just have to make a lot of really hard choices that like they're very like morally questionable on like if it's a correct decision or not. But then you see how like what this one person's going through, and you can either fix that for them so that they don't have to deal with it anymore, but then that will make other people feel bad because something happens to said person. And it's so good. But the last time I played it, I literally cried for like the 45-minute play session because it just messes with your heart so much because the characters are so good and the storytelling is so amazing. But yeah, I've just been playing a lot of Life is Strange, and I can't wait to finish it. But I don't want to have to put myself through the emotional turmoil that is Life is Strange. Life is Strange. Edelweiss, what's your favorite deck of all time?
So, I think there was a point where my answer to this question was always Fatigue Mage, which I don't know that was actually a real thing, but it was. I played Death Lord, the 3-mana 2/8 Death Rattle, pull a minion from the opponent's deck. This was a different time in Hearthstone's history, just by the way. Like, doing that enough could actually just mean you won in Fatigue. So I ran those. I ran the Secret Duplicate, that when one of your minions dies, you add 2 copies of it to your hand. And I had Sludge Belchers. So I would sometimes get extra copies of Death Lord, sometimes get extra copies of Sludge Belcher. I forget if I ran Cold Light Oracles, but I probably ran Cold Light Oracles. It was very much a just kill all your stuff kind of deck. I'm sure it had Polymorph and Flame Strike and Blizzard, and which at the time were good removal tools. And the whole point was just get them into fatigue before we did, and we had antique heal bot back then as well, so that was our source of healing as mage. And yeah, they would die first because of the Death Lords. That would not function in modern Hearthstone. Certainly, would not get there in Wild. But
did it play the card that cast the spell from their hands too? I think that was around the same time. It was like a 4/5 cast a random spell.
No,
from your
I
opponent's
don't
hand.
I don't think we had that. I think I did have Dirty Rat though. Possibly, yeah. So very centered on just removing all the opponent's things, and it was so satisfying when I won because I knew I had beaten every card in their deck. Probably if I had to update, it would be Enraged Warrior with Bloodsworn Mercenary, because that deck is just super fun, like comboing off with Korkrons, and I feel like there were like 3 different versions of something like that deck, but Risky Skipper, Armorsmith, Bloodsworn Mercenary, Korkron Elite, like that was peak Hearthstone, at least in the last few years for me.
Would Risky Skipper be enough for Warrior right now, if that was still in the meta?
I think it would still be really good. Yeah, because Risky Skipper with Anima Extractor is just like, you do that instead of Armorsmith. I mean, or maybe even with Armorsmith, right? We still have Armorsmith. It's just such a good enabler for getting those activations. I mean, you can do this in Wild right now, and it plays ball with the other Wild decks, which is saying something. Obviously, we don't have Bloodsworn Mercenary, even if we had Skipper and Standard, but in Wild, you do have Bloodsworn, and going like Skipper, Anima Extractor, Bloodsworn Mercenary, your hand is massive.
Yeah, mostly lately when I've been in Wild, I play Marky Mark's decks, and those are their own things.
So, Edelweiss, you've been casting a lot more lately. Who's been your favorite person to cast with?
Ooh, yeah. Well, at first it was just TJ and I, and I've only done the 2 instances, and there's no guarantee that I'll get any more. Fingers crossed. But that first time for GMs, it was just with TJ, and I think we have a pretty good dynamic. Next time was the Masters Tour, where I got to go through the full rotation. So I still haven't cast with Sottle, because I was filling in for him. Honestly, I feel like I have the best chemistry with TJ still. I think we have a good rapport. We can kind of make it work with whoever, but I think TJ and I kind of bounced off each other pretty well.
Yeah, and with TJ, even if he dips out for about 10 minutes, you're still pretty good. That was some. That was your first day, right? That was excellent. Excellent. And then on the second day you did it when you were filling in for Sottle, you got the finals.
Yes. I think it was
right.
Derek and I had the finals. Yeah. No, that was pretty sweet. That was intentional, I think. TJ made the schedule, and he was like, well, we've all gotten to cast a finals before, so he wanted to make sure that I had that opportunity, which was very kind.
Plus you also had the air conditioning, so that probably helped factor in as well.
Well, I had to have my air conditioning off, actually, because otherwise it would show up on the audio. Yeah. But I was not in quite the heat that the UK was going through at that moment.
So your niche in Hearthstone seems to be deck building. What makes building your own decks more appealing to you? So,
I have an artistic background, and in general, I like creative problem solving. Initially, when I went to college, I was a physics major before switching to art education. which what a swap there. But I think really the draw of something like physics is just learning those tools to apply to problem solving. Didn't work out because I lacked kind of the discipline for studying for an engineering core, which is just really brutal in terms of the physics, the calculus, the chemistry. It was just a lot. And I hadn't built up the good study habits over high school to deal with that. Whereas art classes, you can kind of, if you're a procrastinator, you can still just towards the end just hammer through it and get the hours in, and like comprehension isn't as important as just like the raw time that you put in. And so I feel like deck building just it has that creativity to it where you can sort of express yourself and try ideas in the same way that I have tended to do with my art, and in particular, I focused on jewelry and metals. Yeah.
Well, I don't know about you, Doc, but I think that was a nice appetizer. But I'm ready for the main course.
Broccoli, broccoli, it's time to eat your broccoli.
All right. So our topic this week, and having Edel on, was specifically talking about deck building, as we've alluded to. Previous weeks we've talked about picking our decks, and then we talked about finding our decks last week on HS Replay, and now we get to talk about making them. So, when you start, where does building a deck start with you? Where do you get your ideas? Do you plan around certain cards, or do you have a theme? So where does that begin with you?
Yeah, so I think there are a few approaches you can take. One is sort of the level one is just to look at a list that someone else has made and say, okay, I like this general idea, but I don't like these certain cards, let's make some swaps, right? And I think that's what most people stick to, right? Is more just the refinement, or maybe even not refinement, but just adding their own personal flair to an otherwise sort of established deck list. And sometimes that's kind of all you can do, right? Like Control Shaman right now, it's like very nearly the perfect 40, right? There's maybe 3 flex or 4 flex cards. And so a lot of times people are just making a few swaps here and there. For me, I tend to start with a card that I'm like, I want to play this. And kind of working backwards from that. I may end up using a lot of those powerful tools. I think you can't just not use certain cards because they're in the best decks. If you want to win games, you have to use the best tools. So even if you're making an off-meta deck, you're going to want to use some of the most powerful cards. In Shaman, that's like Wildpaw Caverns. Most Paladins right now, because of such a board-based meta, you pretty much have to have equality city tax in there to be able to swing the board back in your favor. And yeah, I usually, if I'm starting with a card, it's usually a legendary. It's usually something kind of flashy, right, to build game plan. So for Paladin, which I've done all kinds of iterating, that has tended to be the Countess, right? So that means I'm building pure Paladin or almost pure Paladin. I've had Bran in there. Sometimes I have swapped back to not having Bran and just being able to play Countess on curve. But so Countess has a built-in deck restriction of you can only run Paladin cards. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just, Denathrius is a thing to build around, right? Denathrius says you need to have a very minion-dense deck. You can't just run that unless you have some way of generating minions. The XL rogues, the only reason that they can use Denathrius is because Jackpot tends to give you things that summon minions, and even though they don't run that many minions, they usually generate a fair number of minions. Apart...
And those deck sorry, go ahead. I was gonna say those deck restrictions are gonna go away for you with the upcoming, as we alluded to, the Order in the Court, because now you don't necessarily have to play pure Paladin. You just have to get the cards you need and then get rid of your deck. So
yeah,
that's pretty
but
exciting.
that presents other problems, right? You have to recognize, okay, I'm going to be fatiguing, so I want to, have ways of healing, or like have, make sure that I have Carriel Hero up, so I'm taking fatigue at a slower rate. Paladin actually has pretty good defenses against taking that fatigue damage. So I think if there is a Jailer deck, being able to always get it because of Order in the Court and have all those defensive tools kind of positions it much better than some other classes might be able to utilize. I'm a little bummed that we don't get to do turn 6 Kael'thas 0 mana minion Jailer. That would have been interesting, but probably just as well. It's a little earlier than I think most decks are able to deal with a bunch of immune minions.
Well, on the bright side, you may be able to find a way to shuffle in a few extra duels treasures in a deck like that.
Yeah, potentially. But yeah, the Jailer is another perfect example of a build around kind of card, right? It's got a powerful effect. The turn you play it, you have a 10 mana immune, or 10/10 immune, which is a threat in and of itself. 3 to 4 turn clock. And if you have anything in play, you just get to make all kinds of free trades because they immediately become immune. But it presents this problem of, hey, your deck is gone now. So what does that mean? That means you want to have as close to a full hand as possible when you play it, so you still have resources if they do deal with that initial wave. And or you want to be able to shuffle things into your deck. So that's
and that presents an interesting problem for Paladin, who I would say one of their major flaws right now is a lack of card draw.
Yeah, it actually has a decent amount of card draw. It's just they tend to be cantrips. They're all 1-for-1s. You've got Alliance Bannerman and Knight of Anointment and Flash of Light and Vitality Surge. All of these things, they're just replace themselves. That was part of why I was running Bran, is because then you could do things like Bran Knight of Anointment or Bran Alliance Bannerman, and at least like increase the amount of cards you're getting out of that. I mean, if you go Bran, Bannerman, Knight of Anointment, well then you get to turn that into drawing 4 cards instead of just 2 cards. Another way is to go like Myrmidon, Holy Machia roll, and that's kind of a cute way of drawing a bunch of cards, but like sometimes you actually do need the healing, or you want to use Holy Machia roll with Wild Pyromancer for clear or something. So there are sort of certain packages of cards and synergies that you can run in Paladin, and it's kind of like figuring out which is the best one. Certainly, if we're using the Jailer and still want to run Countess, you can go 40 cards now, because you can just blow your deck up and then be able to play the Countess. So that'll probably be something that I mess with. But I would say the other way to approach deck building is to say there's a thing that I want to beat. And so rather than building around a particular card or strategy that you think is really cool, because it's not always a single card. Sometimes it is something like Relics or Abyssal Curses or whatever, right? More of those usually are a little easier to put together because there's a bunch of cards for it. But sometimes there is something that is either really popular or really powerful or both. And so you're just like, I hate losing to this. Let me try and build something that beats this deck that I hate losing to. And there you kind of have to look at, one, are there any counters that already exist? And what do those decks do that counter this particular thing? And, you know, how can I maybe create that, but in something that is less played?
And would you recommend to not try to get too ambitious with that? Like, don't say, how do I beat Beast Hunter, Relic DH, and Thief Priest? Like, do you kind of like, because you might try to think, well, if I can find something that beats all three, then I have the meta breaker, right? But you got to kind of limit your scope.
Yeah, usually there's just not going to be something that does all that. If there is, someone already found it, and that's the best deck now, and everyone's going to be playing it. It's pretty hard to find something out of nowhere that just beats a whole bunch of decks like that. Particularly if they have different strategies. Now you can find something that slaughters a particular archetype. So you could say, well, this beats anything that goes slower, we just crush them, right? So for a while, Ramp Druid was kind of that, right? It was just like, if you were going long game, they just had twice the mana crystals and would murder you. On the flip side, certain aggro decks, you know, there are things you can do to just make sure you never lose to, you know, aggro druid or aggro DH or imp warlock or those kinds of things. You can build a deck that just has a whole bunch of clears, never lets the opponent get on board, and, you know, silences any obnoxious composting or imp buffs, whatever. There's ways to build to like beat aggro, but typically you're not gonna be able to beat something that just beats archetypes that are totally separate.
Fair. Yeah, it's always interesting, and I always look at some of these decks where if I'm playing something, I'll be like, not necessarily building decks, but I'll say, I am seeing a lot of Imp Warlock, and I really don't like that I'm dying by turn 4 against them. So let's throw in the Topple, even though that's not the recommended card, just because I get frustrated with it. But all right, so we've already talked a little bit about like what you do with if you already have your idea, you kind of inject it into something that exists, or if you're not injecting into something else, how do you try to synergize your deck around your theme? Like, how do you try to find the pieces that make the deck you want outside of the small cards you have?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's not necessarily... It doesn't necessarily have to be a framework. Sometimes it's just like, well, okay, these things are good cards. Or certain packages of cards. So, you know, in Shaman right now, like, you can probably run Wild Paw Caverns in pretty much any Shaman you make, and it's gonna be pretty good. But to take a step away from that, if I'm making a Totem Shaman, maybe that's an instance I don't run Wild Paw Caverns, but you know what? I actually do like schooling there because we have Anchored Totem. And Anchored Totem says give your 1 mana minions +2/+1 when you summon them, right? Well, that is basic totems, but that is also piranhas. So sometimes you can get that synergy going of Anchored Totem plus the piranhas. And you know what else? There's not a ton of totemy things to do on turn 1. We want more 1-drops. We can still run Iron Deep Trog. And if you ever get Iron Deep Trog with Anchored Totem in play, now they really can't play spells because all the Trogs are going to be 3/3s. So even though you're building a Totem Shaman deck, I'm running double bloodlust, right? They don't actually have to be totems. You can just look for these other synergies that exist, and just sort of general good cards like Schooling, like Iron Deep Trog.
All right, so now let's say you've got your theme, you got your idea, you got your deck put together. You're gonna go out there, do some playtesting. How do you decide if a card or a group of cards seem to be working, or if you need to replace them with something else? How does that process
Well,
work
if
for
you want to play a crap ton of games, you can look at the personal data from your HS replay. I am usually not patient enough for that, so I just kind of, I get a sense of like, okay, I died with this in my hand the last X number of games, or like I played this and it was really unspectacular, or like I can just tell that it's the weak link. Now that is something that I can kind of do from experience.
There
Sorry
we are.
about that.
There we go.
What's been happening recently?
You're
I
back.
have to...
Yep.
You have cats.
Wasn't the cat this time. Where did we leave off?
You were talking about not like how you're not patient enough to look at your personal data when trying to see if cards work or not.
Yeah, so I kind of have the experience to realize after a few games, okay, this has been kind of underperforming. I'm just dying with it in my hand, or maybe just I get it in play and it just doesn't really do anything. Sometimes, honestly, a card can be fine. I'm just like, I don't really like it. I think I'm this way with Sunfish and Paladin. Like, it's a plenty good card. I don't love it. I kind of lean towards more value-oriented things. But I think the sort of surefire way is just to get a good 10 or 20 games and then look at your sort of personal data on HS Replay. I think there's a way to kind of show your stats for a particular deck and see sort of your personal mulligan win rate on things. It'll look weird because it's so much smaller sample size compared to what you're usually looking at, but you can kind of get some sense.
I don't know, Doc. 10 to 20 games. Does that sound familiar? Like something I might have said in episode 2? I don't know.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
So we touched on this a little bit, but when you're building, specifically you, when you're building your decks, how often do you factor in the current state of the meta, or do you just find I want this idea, I want to see how it works, and then I'm going to go with it, or are you constantly trying to beat the meta when you're planning your decks?
So I kind of go both ways. It sort of depends, right? Usually I will build to beat particular stuff when it's just like a huge population disparity. So if it's very clear that, 20% of the meta is Ramp Druid, well, I'm more likely to build aggressive then to try and deal with that. Or honestly, same thing for like Relic DH. They don't have a ton of healing, so you want to be aggressive into them. But if things are much more even and it's like hard to say what you're going to face at any given time, there is where I tend to more focus on just like my own game plan and kind of refine that. And, maybe it has some polarized matchups here and there, but you just kind of focus on just doing what your deck wants to do rather than sort of reacting to other things.
Right, so when do you scrap an idea? When do you say, this isn't going to work, or it's not going to work right now?
I mean, usually at like 0-5 or something like that. You can only lose so many games in a row where you're just like, this is not happening. And to some extent, you want to look at more than just the win or the loss. Like if I go 0-5, but I recognize, okay, 3 of these games I got high rolled, right? Another one I just drew like trash. Like this is just variance. You can take a step back and realize that and say I should give this a few more games. But I don't know, if you play a bunch of games and you're like, well, my draw was crap every game, maybe something's wrong with the way the deck is built if you can't get a good draw in in 10 games.
I will say sometimes I get a little frustrated. Not frustrated. Sometimes I get a little determined, and I say I'm gonna quit on this deck, but not until I at least get one win.
Yeah.
But so speaking of that, sometimes you might go 0-5 or 1-6 or whatever it might be as you're learning the deck. How do you balance deck building? Because you play at a high level, you're usually up there in the legend ranks, and how do you balance testing new builds and new decks with climbing and maintaining where you want to be in the ladder? Is that important to you at all? How does that work for you?
Yeah, so I've never been the kind of player to go for like rank 1 legend or top 100 finish or anything like that, just because I recognize I'll go crazy. And I do have pride though, and I sort of know that I can exist within a certain range, so I generally feel okay if I'm like between 1 and 2k legend. Usually if I get into the 2ks, I'm like, all right, I can focus on winning a little more, try and like get back down there. But I think what can be sort of frustrating for some people to hear, because everyone wants to play cool decks, right? We all want to try fun, wacky stuff and do something different. But when it comes to building your own, you do need a certain level of just like fundamentals baked in to really evaluate whether what you're working on is a good idea or not. There may be some decks that someone has come up with and decided was bad, but was perfectly good just because they couldn't pilot it well enough. And so your data is always going to be affected by how well you play the deck, in addition to how good the deck is or not. So I think fundamental Hearthstone skills always come first. Like a meta breaker just isn't going to just do the work for you. That being said, I think they have gotten much, much better at matchmaking. So you should be able to, as long as you are at where you should be in terms of your matchmaking, you should be facing people where you can figure out, okay, is this is this a good enough deck?
That's why I like getting my decks onto Funky Fridays with Funky Monkey, because then I can get someone that knows how to play Hearthstone to pilot the deck that I created, and we can see if it's actually any good or not.
Yeah, exactly.
So what would you say there are some traps that people might fall into when they start building their own decks?
I think one I kind of mentioned earlier, and that's just saying like, oh, well, I don't want to use those cards because those are in every deck of this class. And it's like, yeah, that's because it's like the best card in the class. I mean, if you're playing Demon Hunter, you should run Demon Render Kurtrus. It's a really good card. It ends games. So yeah, don't shy away from things just because they are good, right? Play the good cards. I would say another trap is just like holding on to certain synergies or things that are maybe just like a little too cute. I think people get really attached to certain card combos that they like, and sometimes it's just not powerful enough, and it ends up just being something that needs to get cut for some of those better cards.
For example, Lightbringer, is it Sidisi there? Lightbringer, Sidisi, and Hold the Bridge. That's kind of a combo that I've held on to probably a little too long, because it's really cute when it works, but it doesn't happen all that often.
Yeah.
So do you have any last thoughts on deck building or tips for people that are trying that want to start breaking into deck building on their own? I know we've touched on a few, but are there any last kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say decide what approach you want to take. And that's going to be a little meta dependent, right? Is it there's this cool card that I feel like no one's using that I want to try and build around, or uh, there's this thing that I absolutely don't want to lose to and build around that. Sometimes you can do both, but a lot of times you have to be pretty targeted in a strategy where you want to polarize against something. So that doesn't necessarily mean getting to play the fun card.
Okay, fair. And we did touch on this a little earlier, and I know we talked about Order in the Court. But are there any other cards that we've seen so far in the mini set that you just cannot wait to get your hands on?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of less exciting, but there's that 3 mana 3/4 that lets you infuse things in your deck. And I know my co-hosts aren't as high on it, but I just think that for some classes that might be able to stand out a lot more than people expect. When you can turn your infused cards into good top decks and not just things that you have to like keep in the opener for them to be able to be played on curve. I think there's a lot of potential in there that might surprise people. Or I'll be totally wrong. We'll see.
I was thinking, at least in Wild, you'd play that card plus repeat performers, and then you could have a nice Denathrius top deck.
Yeah. Or expendable performers?
Expendable for, yes, that's the one. The one that it draws minions, they die. If they all die, you get them all again with Rush.
Probably a little slow for Wild, but yeah, that is a fun.
It was just my first thought with that card because
Yeah.
All right, I don't know about you, Doc. I'm getting kind of full, but I think there's some room for dessert.
The time has come for this cookie!
So, Edelweiss, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Swagoy Edelweiss. You can also catch me on Twitch, much less these days. I still need to kind of figure out my new normal in terms of streaming now that I am working like 7:30 to 4:30 every day. But twitch.tv/Edelweiss, I think it's TCG on there. And of course, in the Edelweiss Deck Lab of the Coin Concede Discord, I don't check other places as regularly, but that one I usually keep my eye on. So if you have a deck that you want to try out or you want some input on, just throw it in the channel over there in Coin Concede Discord, and I'll have a look.
I know I sent you a couple with around the dude my dude Holy Paladin and swipe tweak with it to some Rush. Did any of those have any merit at all, or?
Yeah, well, I think this thing that lets you infuse stuff in your deck could really help out a like more minion based infuse Denathrius Paladin. Like if you think of being able to top deck the 4-drop where you infuse and you get the silver hands with Divine Shield, that could be pretty nice. So I think there's something there. It's just we haven't quite had enough cards for it. Maybe with the new stuff, we'll be able to make something happen.
Is there anything coming up that you'd like to plug while you're here, or just your normal Coin Concede?
I mean, I'm gonna be streaming the day of the mini set for sure. So, yeah, see you on Tuesday, I guess.
How about yourself, Doc? Where can we find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter and Twitch at Doc McButt. And what about you, Tito?
You can find me at Twitch at Tito Santana HS. Anybody like to thank today, Doc?
Yeah, so I'd like to thank Steven Moldenhauer, or Scoob Supreme on Twitter. He wrote the music for our podcast, which will hopefully be out on this one and possibly episode 3 as well. What about you, Tito?
I'd like to thank Steven, Jessica, Giorgio, who I'm actually starting up a new secret project with. Very excited about that. And I also wanted to thank Scoob because I'm pretty excited about the intro that he's written for us. The guitar especially is really pretty sweet. Any thanks or anything you'd like to shout? Anybody like to shout out here at the end, Edelweiss?
Yeah, well, of course, the both of you for having me on tonight, and willing to work out schedule stuff with me, and yeah, honestly, not a Hearthstone thing, but just my my housemates for taking care of me. I've been a little sick recently, and they've been really great.
Oh no! Oh, we I told Doc that I had asked you to hop on the show, and you immediately came back and said, "Yeah, when?" And I said, "How it's Saturday?" I'm like, "Hey Doc, we just recorded on Wednesday, but recorded on Saturday. You good with that?" He's like, "Yep." So we are so glad that you are willing to hop on a yet unproven show and provide your expert commentary. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, good luck with the episode.
All right. Thank you so much, Doc. I think with that, we're toast.
Sly two brothers meet one another when they slide up to the mic. Sit, come, listen, maybe change your position. What they say could be right. Got a lesson, a small confession, opinions out of sight. It's bread and butter with one another. Let's start up that recording light.